The city was alive with the usual Friday night rush, cars honking outside, and the glow of neon lights painting the sidewalks. Inside one of the most luxurious restaurants in town, where crystal chandeliers spilled golden light over polished tables and waiters moved like quiet shadows, a sudden piercing cry shattered the air. Heads turned immediately. Guests who had been sipping wine or laughing over dinner froze in irritation. A baby's wail echoed against the high ceilings, sharp, desperate, and unstoppable. At the center of it all sat a man, whose face was instantly recognizable from magazines and business news. Alexander Grant, the billionaire known for his empire of hotels and finance. He was dressed immaculately in a dark tailored suit, but tonight his composure was unraveling. His baby boy, no older than 6 months, was in his arms, screaming with a voice that shook the air. Alexander tried everything. He bounced the child gently, whispered words into his ear, even rocked him against his chest, but the baby's cries grew louder, as if no comfort in the world could soothe him. The elegant restaurant, meant for quiet luxury, was suddenly filled with tension. Diners shifted uncomfortably, some rolling their eyes, others whispering behind hands. The waitstaff exchanged nervous glances, knowing they couldn't dare offend the billionaire, yet the disturbance was impossible to ignore. Across the room, at the far corner near the serving station, stood a young waitress named Angela. She had just finished delivering plates to a table when she heard the cries and saw the billionaire struggling. Her heart clenched. She was used to difficult customers and awkward moments in the restaurant, but something about the way the baby cried, so helpless, so desperate, tugged at her differently. Angela's own life was far from glamorous. She worked double shifts to support herself and her 8-year-old daughter. Maya. People rarely noticed her except when she brought food to their table. But tonight she noticed everything. The billionaire's face lined with exhaustion, the child's red cheeks wet with tears, and the restaurant's uneasy silence. Her instincts as a mother stirred, but she didn't dare move closer. After all, who was she? Just a waitress in a place that only tolerated her presence because she carried plates and smiled politely. At that moment, Maya appeared at the restaurant door. Angela's manager had reluctantly allowed her daughter to sit quietly at the side table while her mother worked the late shift. Maya was a bright, thoughtful girl with warm brown eyes and a tender heart. She watched the scene unfold with an attentiveness far beyond her age. The crying baby pulled at her little soul. Unlike the wealthy diners who looked annoyed, Maya didn't see an inconvenience. She saw a tiny human being in pain. Slowly, carefully, she slid off her chair and walked toward her mother. Angela noticed and whispered sharply, "Maya, stay there." But Maya's eyes were locked on the baby and she shook her head softly. "Mom," she whispered, "I think I can help." Angela's heart raced. "No, Maya, that's a billionaire's child. This isn't our place." But before Angela could stop her, Maya walked forward, her small figure moving with quiet determination across the shining floor. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Alexander glanced up in frustration, expecting perhaps another annoyed guest, but instead he saw a little black girl standing near his table. Her hands clasped together nervously, but her eyes filled with kindness. She didn't speak right away. She only looked at the baby, then at Alexander as if silently asking permission. Something softened in Alexander's expression. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe desperation, or maybe the innocence in the girl's gaze. He nodded slightly, unsure why he was trusting a stranger's child, but too tired to resist. Maya stepped closer, gently reaching out her hands. To everyone's shock, the baby's cries faltered as his teary eyes focused on her face. Maya hummed softly, a tune her mother often sang to her at night. A lullaby without words, just the rise and fall of gentle sound. She touched the baby's tiny hand, and the restless kicking slowed. The dining room, once heavy with irritation, was now heavy with silence of another kind, a silence of awe. Within moments, the billionaire's baby stopped crying. He leaned toward Maya, resting his head lightly against her small shoulder, as if she had known him all his life. The billionaire sat frozen, his arms slack, as his child nestled calmly into the stranger's embrace. The entire restaurant seemed spellbound. Angela rushed forward, her face pale, terrified that her daughter had crossed a line that could cost her everything. But before she could scold or apologize, Alexander spoke in a low, incredulous voice. What did you do?" Maya looked up at him with her innocent smile. "Sometimes babies just need a song and a friend," she said softly. Her words, simple yet profound, cut through the tension like light through glass. The billionaire blinked, his throat tightening unexpectedly. He had wealth beyond measure, power that could silence nations, but in this moment, his crying child had been calmed not by his fortune, not by the finest comforts he could provide, but by the pure heart of a waitress's daughter. Angela stood there, torn between pride and fear. She could see the astonishment in the guests' eyes, the staff frozen in shock. She wanted to protect her daughter from judgment, yet a part of her swelled with emotion. Maya, her little girl who had known struggle all her life, had just done the unthinkable. And in that moment, the story that would forever change all their lives had only just begun. The restaurant remained hushed long after Maya calmed the baby. Guests who had moments earlier glared in annoyance now stared in stunned silence, whispering to each other in disbelief. The billionaire Alexander Grant, a man known for commanding boardrooms and intimidating rivals, sat utterly speechless as he watched his son sleeping peacefully in the arms of a child he had never met before. His chest rose and fell with a heaviness he couldn't describe. For weeks his life had been consumed by sleepless nights, desperate attempts to soothe a baby who never seemed to rest, and the crushing loneliness of fatherhood after his wife's sudden passing. He had thought himself unshakable, but tonight, in front of strangers, his helplessness had been laid bare until this little girl appeared. Angela's heart pounded as she finally stepped closer to the table, her hands trembling as she reached for Maya. "Sweetheart, give the baby back now," she whispered urgently, her voice thick with both fear and maternal instinct. But Alexander raised a hand, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. "Wait." Everyone seemed startled by the authority in his tone. Angela froze, her eyes darting between him and her daughter, unsure if she was about to be scolded or thanked. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes studying Maya with an intensity that made her shift nervously. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Maya looked up, her small voice steady. "Maya, sir, and you are her mother." Alexander's gaze shifted to Angela. Angela nodded quickly, swallowing hard. "Yes, Angela Turner. I'm so sorry if she—" But Alexander interrupted, his eyes returning to the now sleeping infant. "Don't apologize. Your daughter did something none of us could. For weeks I've tried everything. Doctors, expensive nannies, specialists, and nothing worked. And then," he paused, his throat tight, "she just sang." His words carried both wonder and disbelief. Angela felt her face flush with conflicting emotions. Pride swelled within her. Her daughter had done something extraordinary, but fear held her back. This was a billionaire. He didn't live in their world. His power could crush her job, her dignity, her life with a single decision. She bowed her head slightly, murmuring, "She's always been good with children. I'm just glad she could help tonight." But Alexander wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes softening. "How old are you, Maya?" "8," she replied proudly, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "8," Alexander repeated as though tasting the weight of the number. His gaze drifted to Angela again. "She's remarkable. You must be very proud." Angela nodded, but she couldn't bring herself to say more. The pressure of eyes watching them, the weight of her position as a waitress compared to the man before her, made her want to retreat into the shadows. She placed a protective hand on Maya's shoulder. "We should go," she said softly, her voice almost pleading. But once again Alexander's voice stopped her. "Please sit with me. Just for a moment." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. The billionaire inviting a waitress and her daughter to sit at his private table was unheard of. Angela hesitated, but Maya's hopeful eyes looked up at her and she couldn't say no. Reluctantly, she sat down across from Alexander, her posture stiff, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Maya remained close, still gently patting the baby's small hand as he slept. For the first time in months, Alexander allowed himself to breathe. The sight of his son finally at peace loosened a knot inside him that had been wound so tightly he didn't know it could come undone. He cleared his throat, his voice quieter now. "Do you know what it means," he asked, "to carry the weight of the world but feel powerless in front of your own child?" Angela blinked, her chest tightening. She had never imagined a billionaire could sound so vulnerable. She nodded slowly. "I know what it means to feel powerless," she said. Her voice was soft but honest. "Raising a child alone, working day and night just to keep the lights on. It's not the same as your world, but I understand feeling like nothing you do is enough." Her words hit Alexander harder than he expected. He studied her face, seeing lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the kind only a single mother carried. And then he looked at Maya, her gentle touch, her warm smile, her gift of calming his son when no one else could. Something inside him shifted, something he couldn't name. "Maya," he asked softly, "how did you know what to do?" Maya shrugged, her small shoulders lifting. "I just thought about what makes me feel safe when I'm scared. My mom sings to me when I can't sleep. So I sang to him." She looked at the baby with tenderness. "Babies know when you really care." The billionaire's eyes stung unexpectedly. He blinked quickly, turning his gaze away before anyone could notice. For years he had built walls of steel around his heart, defining himself by money, success, and control. But this child's simple words pierced through all of it. Angela shifted uncomfortably, sensing the heaviness of the moment. She rose to her feet, murmuring, "We've already taken up too much of your time. We should let you enjoy your evening." But Alexander rose too, carefully handing his son back into his arms. The baby stirred but remained calm, his tiny face pressed against his father's chest. "No," Alexander said firmly, his voice carrying both gratitude and something unspoken. "You didn't take from me tonight. You gave me something I can't put into words." His gaze locked onto Angela's. "And I don't forget things like this." The restaurant staff and guests watched in stunned amazement as the billionaire extended his hand, not to a business partner, not to a rival, but to a waitress. Angela hesitated before slowly shaking it, her palm trembling in his grip. That handshake was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined, a bond born not of wealth or status, but of a child's compassion. And though none of them knew it yet, this night would alter the course of all their lives forever. The night at the restaurant ended with whispers lingering in the air long after Alexander and his baby departed. Customers left, still talking about the waitress's daughter, who had done what money and power could not. Angela hurried Maya home, her heart torn between pride and worry. On the bus ride back to their small apartment, she scolded gently, "Maya, you can't just walk up to strangers, especially someone like him. That was dangerous." But Maya only leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "He wasn't a stranger, Mom. He was a dad who needed help. And the baby was just scared." Her innocent reasoning softened Angela's heart, and though she wanted to stay firm, she couldn't help smiling a little. Their tiny apartment was worlds apart from the marble floors of the restaurant. The wallpaper peeled in spots and the couch sagged from years of use, but it was home. Angela tucked Maya into bed, kissing her forehead. She whispered, "You amaze me every day." Maya beamed sleepily before drifting off, the image of the baby still in her mind. Meanwhile, in a penthouse that overlooked the glittering skyline, Alexander stood by the crib of his now peacefully sleeping son. For the first time in weeks, silence filled the room. He watched the boy's chest rise and fall, remembering the way Maya had soothed him. The billionaire who could buy anything in the world suddenly found himself humbled by something priceless: compassion. The next day, Alexander couldn't shake the memory. He had built his empire by studying people, knowing who to trust, who to fear, and who to use. Yet the little girl's eyes stayed with him. She had no agenda, no reason to impress him, no fear of his wealth. She had only seen a baby in need. And Angela, her quiet strength, her honesty, lingered in his thoughts too. He had seen countless people bend themselves into performances in his presence, but she hadn't begged for attention or money. She had only wanted to leave with dignity. That intrigued him. By afternoon, his decision was made. Alexander returned to the restaurant, baby in tow. The staff scrambled when they saw him walk in, adjusting their ties, smoothing aprons, whispering in alarm. Angela nearly dropped a tray when she spotted him. She hurried over, panic rising. "Sir, was something wrong last night? Did we—" Alexander held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "Nothing was wrong. In fact, everything was different. And I need to ask you something." His eyes flicked to Maya, who had come to sit quietly again while her mother worked. She perked up, waving shyly at the baby, who gurgled happily in recognition. Angela's stomach twisted. "Sir, I don't know what you're—" But Alexander continued, his tone steady. Your daughter has a gift. I've hired the best, and yet she was the one who reached him. I'd like to spend more time with her, with both of you. His words startled her so deeply she nearly forgot to breathe. The restaurant had fallen silent, all ears tuned to their exchange. Angela flushed under the weight of so many stares. Sir, with all due respect, You're not just anything, Alexander interrupted firmly, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Then, softening, he added, You're a mother who raised a daughter capable of extraordinary compassion, and that matters to me more than you realize. Maya tugged at her mother's apron. Please, Mom, she whispered. He needs help. The baby needs me. Her eyes sparkled with the pure sincerity of a child who didn't understand class divides, only people. Angela hesitated, torn between fear and trust. Everything about Alexander's world screamed danger. The headlines, the power, the gap between them. But when she looked at his face, she didn't see arrogance. She saw exhaustion, even loneliness, and when she looked at the baby, she saw the same vulnerability she once saw in Maya as a newborn, when she herself had been terrified and alone. Slowly, reluctantly, she nodded. All right, but only if Maya wants to. Maya's delighted grin answered for her. That evening, Angela and Maya found themselves in the back of a sleek black car, the city rushing past as they rode toward Alexander's penthouse. Maya pressed her nose to the window, wide-eyed at the towering buildings. Angela sat stiffly, her hands twisting in her lap, her heart racing. What are we doing here? She muttered under her breath. When they arrived, the doors opened to a world Angela had only ever glimpsed in magazines. The penthouse was vast, its floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering skyline. Art pieces worth more than her entire yearly salary lined the walls. But Maya didn't care about the art or the view. She ran straight to the baby, who squealed happily at the sight of her. She scooped him into her arms with a giggle. See, Mom? He remembers me. Alexander watched the scene unfold, something warm tugging at his chest. He gestured for Angela to sit, offering her a glass of water. She perched on the edge of a sofa worth more than her apartment, still uneasy. Why are we here? She asked bluntly. Alexander leaned back, his gaze fixed on Maya rocking the baby with effortless care. Because I want my son to have people like you in his life, he said quietly. People who see beyond wealth, who care without reason. I can't give him that alone. Angela studied him, her suspicion warring with empathy. We're not nannies for hire, she said firmly. He smiled faintly. I know, I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to be yourselves. That's what my son needs. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. Against her better judgment, she allowed herself to relax just slightly. Watching Maya laugh with the baby, Angela realized that in this glittering world so different from their own, her daughter had found a place where her kindness mattered more than anything money could buy. And for the first time in years, Angela wondered if maybe, just maybe, their lives were about to change forever. The days that followed were unlike anything Angela had ever imagined. What had begun as one extraordinary night at the restaurant turned into an unexpected rhythm. After her shifts, Alexander's car would sometimes be waiting, a quiet invitation for her and Maya to visit the penthouse. At first, Angela resisted, worried what others would think, worried about losing herself in a world that wasn't hers. But Maya's joy was impossible to deny. Each time she saw the baby, her laughter rang out like bells, and the child responded as though the two had always been meant for each other. Angela reminded herself again and again she was only allowing this for the baby's sake, nothing more. Yet she couldn't deny that something inside her shifted when she watched Alexander with Maya. He had the air of a man used to control, but around her daughter he became softer. He listened when she spoke, knelt down to her level, let himself laugh at her silly jokes. It was as if Maya had cracked open a door in his heart he'd long since locked. One evening, after Angela finished clearing dishes from dinner, she found Alexander standing by the window, the city lights painting his face in gold and shadow. The baby was asleep in his crib, and Maya had curled up with a storybook nearby. Angela hesitated before joining him, unsure if she belonged in this quiet moment. You know, Alexander said without turning, when my wife died, I thought the world ended. His voice was low, almost fragile, a tone she had never heard from him before. Angela's breath caught. He had never spoken of his wife. I had money, power, everything people envy, but none of it mattered when I came home to silence. Then the baby came, and suddenly I was supposed to be strong for him. But every night he cried, and every night I felt like I was failing both of them. His voice broke just for a second before he caught himself. Angela's chest tightened. She saw now not a billionaire, not the untouchable man from the magazines, but a grieving husband and a struggling father. Carefully, she placed her hand on the railing beside his, not touching him but close enough to let him know she understood. "Grief doesn't care about money," she said softly. "I lost my mother when Maya was born. I was young and alone. I thought I couldn't do it, but somehow, you find a way." Alexander turned his head, studying her face in the dim light. "You make it sound easy." "It wasn't," Angela admitted. "There were nights I cried more than the baby. Nights I thought I'd never be enough. But children don't need perfection. They need love. And love doesn't cost anything." Her words, simple and raw, hung in the air between them. For the first time, Alexander let out a breath that felt like release. He looked at Maya, curled on the couch with the baby's blanket still in her hands, and a smile tugged at his lips. "She reminds me of everything I've forgotten. That innocence, that belief in people." His eyes shifted back to Angela. "Do you ever wonder why some people have so little but give so much, and others have everything but can't even give their hearts?" Angela met his gaze, her voice steady. "Because the ones who have little know what it's like to need. We don't give because we can afford to. We give because we understand what it means to be empty." Something in his chest stirred at her words. He had spent years building walls around his life, surrounding himself with people who wanted his money, his name, his influence. And here was a woman who had nothing material to offer him, yet somehow gave him the one thing he didn't know he craved: truth. As the nights went on, those conversations grew. Sometimes light-hearted, as Angela teased him about his lack of cooking skills or his over-the-top art collection. Sometimes serious, as he asked about her struggles balancing work and motherhood. Maya, oblivious to the adult complexities, continued to be the thread weaving them all together, playing with the baby, filling the penthouse with laughter, reminding them both of what mattered most. But not everyone approved. At the restaurant, whispers grew. Co-workers eyed Angela with envy and suspicion, some muttering cruel jokes about her getting close to the billionaire. Even her manager warned her one night, "Don't get too comfortable. Men like him don't stay. They take what they want and leave people like us behind." Angela went home that night heavy with doubt. She looked at Maya sleeping peacefully and whispered to herself, "What if they're right? What if I'm leading us into heartbreak?" The next day, when Alexander invited them again, she almost refused. But then she saw the baby's face light up at Maya, saw the way his tiny fists reached for her daughter, and Angela couldn't say no. Maybe it wasn't about her. Maybe it was about these two children who found comfort in each other. That evening, as Maya sang softly to the baby in the nursery, Angela found herself alone with Alexander again. He poured 2 glasses of water, handing her one, and said quietly, "People must talk." "They always do." Angela froze, embarrassed. "So you've heard?" He nodded. "I've lived with rumors my whole life. Most of them never mattered. But for once I don't want lies to scare someone away." His eyes locked on hers. "I don't want you to leave." The honesty in his tone struck her deeply. She swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "Why us?" she whispered. "You could surround yourself with anyone." "Why a waitress and her little girl?" Alexander leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "Because you don't want anything from me. Because she gave me something I couldn't buy. And because when I'm around you, I feel human again." Angela's heart pounded. She looked away, clutching the glass tightly. She wasn't ready to admit what she felt, but in her silence Alexander understood enough. That night, as she and Maya left the penthouse, Alexander stood by the window again, watching the city. For the first time since his wife's death, he didn't feel entirely alone. And though neither of them would say it out loud yet, something unspoken had already begun to grow between them. By the 3rd week, Angela's life felt like a whirlwind she hadn't asked for. Every evening after her shift, she found herself torn between exhaustion and the tug of her daughter's hopeful eyes. Maya begged to see the baby again, and Angela, despite her doubts, found herself agreeing. It wasn't just Maya. Deep down, she too had begun to look forward to those quiet evenings in the penthouse, those talks with Alexander that stripped away the weight of titles and riches. But reality wasn't kind. At the restaurant, rumors grew louder. A group of co-workers whispered in the corner whenever she passed. One evening she overheard a customer sneer, "Isn't that the waitress who's been cozying up to Grant?" Typical. The word stung, but she bit her tongue. She couldn't risk losing her job. At home, things were no easier. A neighbor who'd noticed the sleek car dropping them off muttered snide comments in the stairwell. "Careful," she warned, her tone dripping with bitterness. "Men like that don't save women like us. They play until they're bored." Angela tried to brush it off, but at night, lying awake, those words echoed. One evening, when Alexander's driver arrived as usual, Angela almost refused. She looked at Maya's eager face and felt torn. But then she saw the baby's tiny face in her memory, how he clung to her daughter as if she were a lifeline. Angela sighed, taking Maya's hand. "All right, but just for a little while." That night, as Maya and the baby played with blocks on the floor, Alexander noticed the tension in Angela's shoulders. "Something's bothering you," he said quietly. She hesitated before answering. "People talk. They think I'm here for something I'm not." Her voice trembled with frustration. "They don't understand. I'm just trying to protect my daughter." Alexander's jaw tightened. He had seen this before, people twisting kindness into scandal. He leaned forward, his tone firm but gentle. "Angela, people will always talk. They talk about me every day. If I lived by their words, I'd be nothing but their puppet. Don't let them define you." Angela looked at him, her eyes burning. "That's easy for you to say. You live in a world where money shields you. I live in a world where one rumor can cost me my job, my dignity, everything." Her words cut him. For the first time, Alexander truly saw the chasm between them. Not just wealth, but survival itself. He could afford to ignore whispers. She could not. Later that night, as Angela tucked Maya into the guest room the penthouse staff had prepared for her, Alexander lingered at the doorway. Maya clutched the baby's blanket, smiling sleepily. "Don't worry, Mom," she murmured. "He needs us. That's all that matters." Angela kissed her forehead, but her own heart was heavy. When she returned to the living room, she found Alexander waiting by the fire. The flicker of the flames softened his features, but his eyes were troubled. "You're right," he admitted. "I don't understand your world the way I should, but I want to try." Angela crossed her arms, her voice low. "Why? Why risk the gossip, the scandal, the questions? You don't need us. You could hire 100 nannies. Surround yourself with anyone you want. So why us?" Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "Because I don't want anyone else. Because when I see you with my son, when I see Maya, I remember what love looks like. And I can't lose that again." The raw honesty in his voice left her speechless. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of firewood. Angela felt her defenses faltering, but fear clawed at her still. "This isn't a fairy tale," she whispered. "I can't let Maya believe in something that might disappear." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Then let me prove it won't." The intensity in his tone unsettled her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that kindness and truth could bridge the gap between a billionaire's penthouse and a waitress's worn-down apartment. But her life had taught her that dreams often came at a price. In the days that followed, tension continued to build. Alexander began showing up at the restaurant, not as a customer demanding service, but as a man waiting patiently at a corner table until Angela's shift ended. The staff gossiped louder, some jealous, others cruel. Angela's manager pulled her aside one night, his tone sharp. "You're bringing trouble here. If this distracts you or ruins the restaurant's reputation, you'll be out." Angela left work shaken. She thought about quitting the visits altogether, pulling Maya away from Alexander's world before it went too far. But when she came home that night, Maya was already humming the lullaby she sang to the baby, her eyes sparkling. "Mom, do you think he'll remember me forever?" Angela's chest ached. She brushed her daughter's hair back tenderly. "I think you'll always be special to him." But deep inside, she wondered if she was leading Maya into heartbreak. Meanwhile, Alexander was fighting battles of his own. At the office, his board members noticed his distraction. A cold-faced partner sneered, "We hear you've been spending time with unusual company. It's not wise for a man of your stature. Alexander's glare silenced the room, but inside he simmered. He had built his empire on strength, but for the first time he felt he had something worth defending beyond money. That night, as he stood over his son's crib, he whispered, "I don't care what they say. For you, for us, I'll fight it." And though Angela didn't know it yet, the divide between their worlds was about to be tested harder than ever before. The weeks that followed that unforgettable night at the restaurant moved like a dream for Maya and Lila. What had started as a simple act of compassion, a child's hum soothing, a crying baby, had unraveled into something neither of them could have ever imagined. Alexander Grant, the billionaire once seen only in glossy magazines and news headlines, had not only entered their lives but refused to leave quietly. He began visiting the restaurant, not as a powerful mogul, but as a father who had found in Lila something rare and unexplainable, a presence that calmed his daughter in a way no one else could. Every time he came, the diners would whisper, staff members would steal glances, but Maya had grown used to the sight of him, dressed not in designer suits but in soft sweaters, cradling his baby girl while waiting at a corner booth. For Maya, it was bewildering. She had lived her entire life surviving, working long hours, protecting her daughter from the world's cruelties, and expecting little more than the daily wage she earned. But now here was a man whose world was built of excess and influence, choosing to step into hers. And yet, when he sat with them talking quietly or listening to Lila's laughter, the gap between billionaire and waitress seemed to dissolve. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and gold, Alexander invited Maya and Lila to his home. It wasn't just a home, but a mansion sprawling with glass walls, gardens trimmed like art, and rooms bigger than their entire apartment. Lila ran through the halls, her laughter echoing as the billionaire's baby squealed in delight from her stroller. Maya, however, felt small, almost misplaced, like a shadow in a palace. Alexander must have noticed her unease because he turned to her, his voice unusually soft. "This place has been empty for years. I built it to impress people, but it never felt alive until now." His gaze lingered on Lila, who had taken the baby into her arms and was showing her how to clap. "It's strange. I thought wealth could fill the silence. Turns out it takes something much simpler." Maya lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. She had never been one to dream of riches. Her only dream was to give her daughter safety, love, and perhaps one day opportunity. But as she watched Lila, radiant and full of life in a home that seemed to welcome her presence, something inside Maya ached. What if this was the chance her daughter deserved? The moment that would change everything came 2 days later. Alexander arrived at the restaurant again, but this time he wasn't dressed casually. He wore a suit, though not the kind that announced power. This one was humble, understated. He waited for Maya to finish her shift, his expression carrying a seriousness that made her heart race. When she approached, wiping her hands on her apron, he stood. "Maya," he began, his voice steady, "I've been thinking about something for a long time, and I need to say it." She frowned. "What is it?" He glanced toward Lila, who was seated nearby with his daughter in her lap, both of them giggling at a silly game. Then he looked back at Maya, his eyes heavy with both hope and fear. "I want to give her the future she deserves. Lila has a gift, not just with children, but with people. She carries a light this world can't dim. I can give her the education, the doors, the opportunities that would otherwise stay shut. I want to sponsor her, take care of her schooling, her dreams. I want her to know she can reach any height she wants." Maya's breath caught. The room seemed to spin. She had always dreamed of Lila having more than long shifts and second-hand books, more than bills and worries. But the thought of accepting something so vast from a billionaire frightened her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why us?" Alexander's eyes softened. "Because your daughter did the unthinkable. She reminded me of something I had forgotten, that love isn't bought, it's given. That kindness can't be measured in wealth. That night when she soothed my child, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a baby who needed comfort. She saw a father who was lost. She gave without asking, and that is something I can never repay, but I can try." Tears blurred Maya's vision. She wanted to say no, to hold on to her pride, to refuse charity. But then she looked at Lila, her little girl glowing with joy, holding the billionaire's daughter as though she had always been meant to protect her. And Maya realized this wasn't about her. It was about a future bigger than her fears. "Promise me one thing," Maya said, her voice breaking. "Promise me you'll never take her away from me. She's my whole world." Alexander's reply came without hesitation. "I promise. She will always be yours. I just want to help her shine." That night, Maya held her daughter close, whispering prayers of gratitude. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, life had something more to offer them. Months later, Lila stood at the gates of a prestigious school, her backpack slung over her shoulders, her eyes wide with wonder. Alexander stood nearby with his daughter, watching proudly while Maya held back tears. The world had opened for her child, not because of wealth, but because of a single, selfless act in a restaurant that had once echoed with a baby's cries. The diners who had witnessed that night still told the story, of how a billionaire's power meant nothing against a child's compassion, of how a waitress's daughter did the unthinkable and changed not only one man's life but her own forever. And deep down, Maya knew this was only the beginning.